But in the Senate, what we find is that it's much more collegial. We tend to walk across the aisle.
Welcome to our Biz Huddle podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Cuthbert, Creative Director at Baker Creative. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please hit subscribe so you can get notified when new content comes out. Please share this with anyone who could be inspired by it. Welcome, Senator. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. We're so excited to have you.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Michelle.
So tell us, how did you first become interested in serving others, and whether it's a teacher or an elected official, what did that look like?
I don't even know when it all first started. I think it's funny. My family knows the story. When I was 5 years old, I got my tonsils out because that's what happened when in the 60s, right? They took our tonsils out the minute we got sick when we were little kids. I was in the hospital. No one explained anything to me about being there and being there overnight, because that was also a part of being a little kid in the 60s, is people didn't explain anything to you. Mm-hmm. And I was in a room with a couple other children, and the little girl in the room started crying for her mom in the middle of the night. I didn't know we had a buzzer for a nurse. I had already had my surgery, so I could barely talk. I got out of my bed. I checked on her. I told her everything would be okay. I'm 5 years old. Mm-hmm. I went out in the hall and tried to find a nurse because I knew that an adult needed to go comfort this child. Mm-hmm. I think it was just part of who so in the answer to your question is, I can't remember a time before that, but it's just like, it's always sort of been in me. Certainly my grandmother, who encouraged us to read, and my mother, who was just the symbol of hard work. And everything just came together for me in that I was inspired, and I had this purpose that I was supposed to leave the world better than I found it, and that somehow I was responsible too.
Yeah. Well, I think that's pretty cool that you knew that so early on, because a lot of times people don't have that voice, that direction.
Yeah.
So then what did you learn from teaching children with special needs?
I got very interested pretty early again. We had a cousin, an older cousin, who had special needs. And so I had been around her since I was a child. And one of the things that stuck with me was that she was sent to a school far away from her family. And it seemed very tragic. And it really affected the family that they were so far away from her. And I thought there has to be a better path. And so as I was looking into, I wanted to be a teacher, along the way, I got very interested in working with children with different kinds of abilities. And so by the time I got my degree, went into the schools and did that, I also spent a couple of summers at a summer camp in Northeast Ohio called Camp Cheerful, which is for children, especially with different physical abilities. And I loved everything about working with those kids. It forced me to focus. My brain is busy in a lot of different directions all the time. And some people find meditation, and while I do meditate sometimes, what I found was when I had to work intensively with someone who had language issues, for example, I had to focus completely on them. There was something very freeing about that. And so that helped me choose that as my path. When I went to work, I worked with teenage kids, junior high age kids, who had behavioral problems as well as learning problems. And I have to say they were my favorite group of humans to work with. And what I learned from them was everything I use now to deal with my colleagues in the legislature, because you have to have a sense of humor. You have to take risks, and be a little courageous sometimes. You have to really like people. And I had to find common ground and never put them in a corner, never back them into a corner that there wasn't a way out. And so I learned my negotiating skills first with 13-year-olds with behavioral problems.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I'm telling you, I use so many of those skills today. I really do.
Yeah, I could see why that would, I mean, it's got to be really frustrating when it's, contentious sometimes and to rely on those kind of things, right?
Right. I mean, my first day of teaching, I'm a brand new teacher, and I come into a classroom and I've got like 12 kids because it was a special program and of intensive instruction and also small to deal with behavioral issues. And it was boys and girls, and the girls are sitting in front, and a boy chimes out, "I'm going to whip it out." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, do you want to come up to the front of the class? Because I'm sure the girls could use a laugh today."
I love that.
And he shrunk down in his chair. That was, the girls all laughed. That was the end of it, and went on. I turned around to the board and went, "Oh, thank God that worked." Because you just never know. It could have gone totally a bad direction. So
no, totally true.
But I mean, again, those are the kinds of things that I think I've learned, is just a little bit of sense of humor, a little bit of standing strong, and a little bit of luck and timing too.
I agree completely. So how did the service in the House differ than being in the Senate?
The House is a huge 100 people, 100 members. When I served there, we had somewhere between 40, we had about 40 members. So we were in the minority, but there was a lot to be done. I learned a lot in the House, how to establish relationships, how to negotiate, how to just move through this big body of members. And then as I moved into leadership in the House, then it was navigating a large group of quarterbacks, because you have these legislators, but each one is a quarterback in their own community, as they represent their districts. And so there was a lot of interpersonal work and just navigating on how to get folks who in their own right are their own, almost like self-employed people, really. I mean, running a legislative office is very much like running a small business. I had my own consulting business for a while before I joined the legislature, and it's very similar. You have a couple staff, you have a budget, you have lots of things to pay attention to, and you need to work with other folks to get anything done. And there's a lot of interests swirling around that you need to interact with. Very relationship oriented. So I love the bigness. I love the fast pace of the House. It seemed like things, when they moved very fast. And then I came to the Senate, and at first I was struck by how small it was. We are 33 total members. I have 7 members in my caucus right now in the Democratic caucus. And so we still serve in the minority, but now I'm also the minority leader. And while I've had other leadership positions in the Senate, now I'm responsible for sort of the direction and the movement of the caucus in general, as well as interacting and working with my quarterbacks still. And so, but in the Senate, what we find is that it's much more collegial. We tend to walk across the aisle to work with each other much more, I think, in the Senate. Sometimes it's because we've just got longer relationships. Many of the folks I work with in the Senate, I got to know first in the House. And in the House, what I learned by some very wise colleagues of mine when I first came in said, you want to stand up for the people, be the voice of the people that you represent and the voice of people who agree with you throughout the state. Great. Don't make it personal. Make it about the policy and the issues. And I have always tried to do that. And I have to say that I think it's helped me be successful with passing legislation, and really working through issues, because I've worked very hard at things not being personal. And so in the Senate, that's even more critical, because now we're really in very close quarters working with each other. So my role has obviously changed, being the minority leader. I interact a lot with the president of the Senate now, trying to work things out when we can, agree to disagree when that's what's available to us. But as a result, it has made me sharpen my negotiation skills, communication skills for sure. And it requires, however difficult it is, that I truly stick to my original tenets when I first joined the legislature, was that I have to maintain not to have the work that we're doing be personal.
Mm. So then how does your duties as the Senate Minority Leader differ in the service in the past of the House?
Well, there's an increased responsibility in raising money, for sure, for the caucus, as well as my own campaign fund. But now I'm also responsible. I have a deep responsibility. I mean, I work with my colleagues to jointly do some of that fundraising, but just a larger scale of fundraising. I have the policy staff as well as caucus staff to supervise, oversee. I have always tended to take that 2,000-foot look at policy. I've been a policy nerd forever. I love public policy. It's part of what drove me to do this to begin with. I kept asking questions about why we do things the way we do when I was a teacher, or when I ran an outpatient treatment program for women. And we kept coming back to, well, it's the policy. There's a state law. There's a policy that requires us to do it this way. So now it's looking at that and having a strategy. Who's the best person for the committee to be on the committees? Who are the best staff to be there, checking in with the policy staff? So there's a lot more management. Now it is a little bit bigger small business, if you will, with somewhere around 15 to 20 employees that are working on all different levels of individual pieces of legislation, as well as what's our caucus strategy and how are we communicating and working together as members as we try to forward our agenda.
So how has the adoption open records law you supported made a difference?
Oh my gosh, that was an amazing process. It is one of the pieces of legislation that I am the most proud of, and I think ultimately has had the biggest impact on people. They estimate that over 400,000 Ohioans who were adopted will ultimately be affected by this. And then you can just do the math going out. That's the individual adoptees. When you think about how many families are going to be affected. So there were 4 legislators that worked on the open adoption records law. Dorothy Polanda and I worked in the House. She's a Republican. I'm a Democrat. In the Senate, it was Dave Burke and Bill Beagle, 2 Republican senators that got on the bill. Now, the most interesting thing to me is the fact that each of us that was involved in this bill and were the lead sponsors sat in a different place around the circle with our perspective to how adoption had touched our lives. My youngest sister, who was 15 at the time, gave a baby up for adoption. She later met him, united with him, is the proud grandma of his child, and has a wonderful relationship with both her son that was adopted and her grandchild now. Dorothy Polanda adopted a daughter, and raised her in her family. Bill Beagle had an adopted sister that he grew up with and loves very much. And Dave Burke was adopted himself and did not have any information. He actually was one of the people that fell into the category of this gap where he could not get original adoption records. So it was amazing that the 4 of us worked together. Dorothy and I worked the bill through the House. It went over to the Senate. There was a Senate version that ultimately passed, but we all worked together. It was a heavy lift of all of us to do that. I have met, people have come up to me, people have sent me emails and letters telling me how it affected their lives, how it changed their lives forever. One of my fond colleagues that I worked with when I was on city council in Lakewood actually met his birth father and his mother through the fact when the adoption records were opened up, and I got a letter from him, from his mother. I mean, I'm just reading the email and sobbing through the whole thing. It's powerful when people actually are affected. And that's, I think, the other thing about it, reminds me of how important and what a huge honor and responsibility it is to do this work. I may never know all the lives that are affected by the legislation we pass, but I've been so lucky to touch base and have people reach out and let me know their own personal stories. And frankly, it's the thing that keeps me going when things are really hard.
Oh, it's so nice to be able to look back and hear that positive impact, and knowing that people, I mean, enough to approach you about it. That's pretty awesome.
I feel very blessed. I know that a lot of times in a lot of people's work, you probably do impact and make a difference, but you never hear it. I have been very lucky in my life that I've gotten that contact from people that have reached out and let me know. Yeah.
So how have your historic firsts inspired other members of the LGBTQ community?
Well, it's interesting. I get a little bit of feedback on that as well. I think in a number of ways, some for people who want to run for office and who are running for office, they have come and told me that, I inspired them. I'm especially appreciative of that because when I decided to run in 2005 for the city council in Lakewood, I really didn't have any role models of people who were out, who were successful and had run. I really had a lot of great women role models for sure. Ones I knew and ones I didn't. Shirley Chisholm was somebody I didn't know, but I looked to as such an incredible role model because she wrote a book called Unbought and Unbossed. If you haven't read it, you should. It's very little, but it's amazing. And so she was a real North Star for me. But then some other women, CJ Prentice, Jane Campbell, some women locally, Madeline Kane, who was our mayor in Lakewood, that really provided some guidance for me as far as being role models as women running. But what I didn't have was role models from the LGBTQ community locally or in the state. So now what I hear, because I'm very matter of fact, it's a part of who I am. It's not all of who I am. I work on lots of issues around education, around health and human services for sure. Violence against women is a big part of the kinds of policy work that I do. And so the feedback I've gotten is that it's helpful that I'm there, that I'm very matter of fact about everything. I hope that I've given people, certainly I've chosen to do this my way, but my way is to be totally involved. I was involved in the community, my wife now, but then my partner and I were raising two girls in Lakewood. We were involved in our daughters' lives, just like any other parents. So we were, on the music boosters and the athletic boosters, and we were, selling hot dogs and doing all the stuff that parents do when your kids are involved. I did props, hair, and makeup when my daughter decided she wanted to be in theater at the local Beck Center Theater. I mean, and from that, we met people and they met us as the full, authentic people that we were. Complete people, moms first, and then involved in our children's lives. But then, and by the way, also, lesbian moms. And so I hope that the model is that the best person for the job is the best person for the job first.
Absolutely. So that being said, you've worked all kinds of different jobs. What do you think is the biggest mistake that women business owners make? What do you see?
Well, it's interesting. I have had a lot of jobs. Sometimes I think I have a Mary Poppins complex or something because I've popped in, I've worked for 2 years, and then I've moved on to something else. One of the mistakes I made, I was running a nonprofit, but again, it's like running a small business. I didn't ask for enough. If I was asking for a grant, I shortchanged myself. And the only way I found that out was by sitting in a couple of meetings where other applicants came in. And then I heard what they were asking for. And so I think women business owners, I think do the same thing as well. We don't ask for because we don't think we deserve or we're going to get what we deserve. And it's that. So whether it's a loan amount or other resources, assistance, because I also had a hard time asking for help because I thought if I ask for help, I'm going to look weak. It's going to look like I don't know what I'm doing. Of course, I know what I'm doing. I also know what I need to help me do better. And so I think we need to lean in and really be grounded and fully planted, with both feet in our confidence that we know what we're doing, but it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to ask for more than perhaps we think we should. I mean, I think we need to push the envelope. So I think that's one of the thing. I talk to nonprofits about that all the time as well.
I think that's great because I think all your background makes you who you are to add to the job you're at right now. I think it's good to have that. It all, just like I said in the beginning, it's all connected and you don't know it. And then you're like, okay, that's cool. I know I got this. I can pull it from something else.
And that doesn't mean that I, like every other woman, sometimes finding yourself as the only woman in the room, the woman making the pitch for something that sounds perhaps a little outrageous or too big, doesn't have a little, moment of imposter syndrome as well. I think there's times we all have it. I think it's what you do with it. And because at a very young age, I was also told because by a counselor in high school that I couldn't even think about going to college because he knew my parents didn't have money. And so he said, the best you can hope for, go learn how to type and you could be a secretary and that'll be fine. You'll be able to take care of yourself. And I was like, I want to go to college. My grades were good. And so instead of listening to him, I just said, I don't think he knows what he's talking about. And thank goodness I had whatever that was in me to do that. And I think for all of us, stepping out on that cliff or that really narrow, skinny branch of the tree to really take that risk, I think you have to ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? And the times when I have not succeeded or there's been some kind of failure, I've learned from that and then done it better the next time. So I don't think there's any downside to really pushing the envelope.
I was doing some reading and that very thing is resilience, bar none. Yeah. And I see that as the theme of the movie that, Trailblazing Women for Ohio Politics, they're all resilient. And even the people, all the women that's involved in the whole project, not just the film. And that's going to continue to grow. And it has got my full respect. I mean, it's just so much you guys had to overcome. It's amazing. So what does the future look like moving forward? What's that look,
Well, the near future for me is I'm in a 4-year term. I'm also term limited. Ohio, it's not a good thing for Ohio that we have term limits, but we do. And so after my term is over, I don't know. I do know that right now I'm very focused on doing a good job on increasing my numbers in the next election cycle if I can, so that I have more senators in my caucus, and basically just continuing to deliver to the people. But I also feel a strong sense of the necessity of, as we climb, we absolutely have to reach back and pull the next generation, the next people to fill these jobs, whatever it is, with us. And so I feel a strong sense of, I do a lot of mentoring of especially women running for office and coming into their own in these positions. I've encouraged women from the LGBT community, but also women of color. I have a good friend right now, Monica Wilson, who's the first African-American city council person in the city of Parma. I'm so proud of her and so happy for her, historic first there. So I keep encouraging and pushing and mentoring. And so my expectation is that I want to do a lot more of that, because part of leaving the world better than we found it is leaving the next generation of leaders in these positions as well.
Does that extend to like what your personal legacy may be, kind of an extension of that?
I hope so. I think I hope that that's part of it. It's funny. It was the reason why I got involved in politics to begin with, is I wanted to see more women in office, because I really believe women do such a good job. We're much more collaborative. Frankly, we're a lot more, we have a track record of ethical behavior and people trust us, and for good reason. And so I think women make excellent policymakers and public servants. And I hope that part of my legacy for sure is that more women get involved and seek the highest levels. I'm very happy on the national level that we have a woman vice president. I worked very hard to try to get a woman in the Oval Office, and I'm going to continue to work on that as well. It's not going to be me, but I'm going to celebrate when we have someone who's there, and I'll know that I played some kind of a part in that.
That's pretty cool. So I appreciate your time. I know you're super busy, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks for this today. It was fun.
If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please hit subscribe so you can get notified when new content comes out. Please share this with anyone who could be inspired by it, and feel free to post any questions so we can be inspired by new content. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in learning more, visit our website at bakercreative.co.